Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Bill Reinsch, a senior advisor with the Economics Programme and Scholl Chair in International Business at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Bill, thank you very much for joining me today. During a briefing with reporters on Sunday, Donald Trump said that there would be 25% tariffs on all steel coming into the US. The details on that are still pretty vague, but this would have quite a major impact, wouldn't it?
Well, the bigger impact would be on aluminum, I think, because a substantial part of our aluminum is that we consume is imported, mostly from Canada. So the biggest impact would be on Canada. There will be a steel impact as well. Steel imports have had tariffs for a long time. There are still some tariffs left over from the Trump administration on both that exist. So yes, there would be an impact there, probably primarily on Europe, because we have suspended the earlier tariffs with the Europeans. So that will make a difference there. I should say, he hasn't announced them yet. It's mid-afternoon here in Washington, and we're all waiting to see. There's nothing official out yet, but I'm aware of what he said yesterday.
Here in the UK, there are concerns, while we don't make as much steel as other nations do, that it could be a fatal blow to our steel exports to the US. Who's going to be damaged most by these tariffs, though, if they did come in?
Well, I think probably the Canadians and the Europeans would be at the top of the list, and the Japanese with respect to certain products. The Chinese have pretty much been knocked out of our market already via prior tariffs on due to unfair trade practices, dumping or subsidies. So they're less of a factor. So it would be our North American partners, Canada and Mexico, and Europe, including the UK, that would be the primary victims.
And you mentioned China there. Of course, China's retaliatory tariffs on US imports, including oil, coal, and natural gas, they were set to come into effect today and yesterday. What sort of impact could they have? And are they likely to deter further tariffs?
Trump did not react to them, although he promised to. In fact, his executive order said that if the other country, and it was the same for all three at the time, Canada, Mexico, and China, if the other country retaliated, then he reserved the right to counter-retaliate. He didn't do that yet, so we'll see. What they did was rather modest. I think most of us expected them to go after agriculture first, because that's where we're vulnerable, and that would do the most harm to the United States. And they didn't do that. Going after fuel, oil, gas, coal, probably hurts them more than it hurts us, actually. I don't think it's going to make that much difference in the marketplace as far as the United States is concerned. The big thing, one thing that will hurt is the extent to which they put tariffs on cars and trucks. China's not the biggest destination for American cars and trucks. In fact, we have our automobile plant companies, Ford, GM, and actually Tesla, all have plants in China. But there are imports, and the auto industry is under a lot of pressure right now because of the other Trump actions. So they probably will be unhappy at this. Probably the biggest problem they're going to cause with retaliation is the export controls on more minerals, particularly tungsten and several other minerals that have defense applications that we either don't have or don't have very much of.
And Trump has suggested his 10% tariffs on China are just a start. Where might Trump look to next if he's going to put more tariffs on? And how concerned should the rest of the world be about a trade war between those two nations?
Well, they should be more concerned about the universal tariffs that he's probably going to announce later this week. He's threatened to do that. I thought that he would wait until April because he commissioned some studies that would address that. But it's beginning to look like he doesn't want to wait for the studies. He just wants to go ahead. A universal tariff or 10 or 20% on everything from everybody would have a huge impact. A trade war with China will have an impact, if that's the only thing that happens, will have an impact in part by trade diversion. That is, if Chinese trade with the United States is blocked or made more expensive, it's going to go somewhere else. This is like squeezing a balloon, and we can squeeze it and it just pops out somewhere else. And the obvious destinations are Europe, Latin America, and Africa.
And you say where else the trade could go. I mean, even production. China's already been offshoring a lot of its production, as we know. How difficult could it be for the US to try and go after those Chinese goods that are produced now outside of China?
Well, when they try to circumvent U.S. tariffs by moving their production to a third country, um, under our law, depending upon the legal situation at the time, our law will permit us to do a variety of things. But it's a constant cat and mouse game that goes on always, and you're always one step behind. We saw this in solar panels. We imposed duties on solar panels, and the Chinese moved to Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. And so now we're in the process of imposing duties on solar panels from those four countries. And the response will probably be that they'll move somewhere else, and then we'll impose duties on them. I mean, it's always the problem is that you're always one step behind. The new development that's actually interesting is that a number of other countries have begun to get fed up with Chinese overcapacity as well. So it's not just us. You see the EU, India, uh, Brazil, Turkey, uh, South Africa, Indonesia, Canada, Mexico, all imposing or thinking about imposing tariffs on Chinese goods because of overcapacity. So they're not all the same, and they're not all about the same products. But this is catching on. This is not a United States China problem. This is a China versus the world problem.
And you say there's recognition of that elsewhere. I mean, is there room for Trump to strike deals and negotiate with other countries to, recognize that problem that China represents for many other world economies?
Huh. Well, if he's smart, he'll do that, but I don't expect that. He's not very good at multilateralism. He believes in bilateral negotiations, largely because he thinks that we're bigger than everybody else and we can push the other guy around. And he's worried that if he enters into a collective thing, everybody else can gang up against him. Uh, so uh, I don't look to him for multilateral leadership. But you're right. There's a golden opportunity for this. You got a bunch of unhappy countries all experiencing the same problem, and there's a real opportunity there for somebody to say, "Why don't we all work together, basically to force the Chinese to eat their surplus?" But I don't see him as the person to do that.
And we've talked about some of the unilateral tariffs that Trump could put on. Of course, he's paused those tariffs with Mexico and Canada, and these steel tariffs we discussed earlier and aluminium haven't yet been imposed, as you say. As far as we can, as far as we can tell, does the scale of these proposed tariffs suggest it could be a negotiating tactic by Trump?
Well, that's the great mystery. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at one point said that for Trump, tariffs are in three categories: retaliating against unfair trade practices, raising revenue, and negotiating leverage. Uh, I thought Canada and Mexico and China actually were about negotiating leverage. And in a sense, that's working. Uh, Canada and Mexico agreed to negotiate, and I think that will happen. I don't think the negotiations will be done in 30 days, which was the postponement time. So I think what you'll see is a series of rolling postponements, each time for a month or so, to keep the pressure on, but opening negotiations. China was similar. I think he understood that if he did 60% tariffs, as he threatened during the campaign, the Chinese would cut off contact and there would be no prospect for a deal. And I think he wants a deal with China, and concluded that 10% would push them, but not push them too far. Uh, and so far, he did it. They responded about roughly the same amount. So mild response, mild penalty. I think they're waiting for the call to negotiate. He mentioned that he's been invited to Beijing. He didn't say that he was going, but he said he was invited. So I think he's looking for a deal there. You know, I have to say that's what he tried in 2018, 2019, and 2020, and the Chinese played him. Basically, he got very little. Uh, he gave up all of his policy objectives and got a commitment to buy more stuff that they didn't fulfill anyway. So, but we'll probably see that again. Uh, and with Canada and Mexico, it'll be similar. Under the terms of that agreement, the U.S. Canada Mexico trade agreement, uh, we have to renegotiate in 2026 anyway. So all he's really done is move the timetable up a year. Uh, the harder one will be if he does something with Europe, uh, and if he does the universal tariff. A universal tariff is, I mean, I don't think he's going to negotiate with 195 countries. So he's probably putting that one in to raise money. And he needs the money because he wants more tax cuts.
And so, do you think Mexico and Canada should still be worried about further US tariffs, or do you think that kind of battle might now be over?
No, the battle's never over with Trump, and they should be worried. In fact, he said recently that the concessions they made over the previous weekend were not enough. Um, but if you look at the scenario here, what he likes to declare victory. He likes to say, "They folded, I win." And the interesting thing in the United States was you had a media with opposite headlines on the morning of February 3rd. Some stories said Trump folded because he didn't impose the tariffs. Other stories said Canada and Mexico folded, which is why he didn't impose the tariffs. In truth, both were right. And I think Prime Minister Trudeau and President Sheinbaum figured out how to play him, which is you assert sovereignty politely. You don't poke him in the eye. You make minor concessions that don't make a lot of difference. Best if they were things you'd previously conceded before as well. You're just doing it again, hoping he doesn't remember. And third, you let him declare victory and you don't object. And that's what happened. And we'll probably go through this a couple more times. They'll make a few more concessions and he'll declare victory a few more times. And we'll see where we end up. I mean, there is also always the possibility that he'll run out of patience and just pull the trigger. There are people who think that because there was such a negative market reaction, financial market reaction, the morning of February 3rd, overnight Sunday and Monday morning, that persuaded him to not impose the tariffs. And I think that if he gets back to the point of wanting to do it again, you'll see the same market reaction.
And what impact are Trump's tariffs likely to have on the US economy?
Well, they'll be inflationary. I mean, one of the ironies of this whole debate is that the Trump people don't think they'll be inflationary. Trump is absolutely convinced that the foreigners pay and Americans won't be affected. All available data suggests that that's wrong, but that's what he thinks. So it'll be inflationary. It will cause shortages in categories that are hard to predict at this point. If he goes ahead with Canada and Mexico, the biggest loser will probably be the automobile industry because it's integrated within North America. Products go back and forth across both borders. I have a slide on this when I teach this stuff that shows a rear axle assembly from a Chevrolet product. It's put together in 9 different factories in 5 different states of the United States and 4 different factories in Canada. And it goes back and forth across the border 6 and 7 times. If it has to pay the tariff every time, you're talking about an enormous cost to the industry, an enormous dislocation. And the best Trump could say in response, he said 2 things. One, well, there may be some short-term pain, but we'll all be better off in the long run, which nobody believes. And the second response has been, well, if companies move to the United States, they won't have to pay the tariff. And he's right. But the tariffs go into effect right away. Building a plant here takes years. the decision to build a plant here takes months. Nothing happens quickly when you're making a big investment.
And just to come back to China to finish, it sounds to me like you don't believe that Trump is going to be able to outmaneuver China if he does bring them to the table on trade.
I don't think so. No, he didn't before. They're very. They. I think. I think the difference between this time and the last time is everybody's figured him out, and they're preparing, and they'll be better prepared this time around. And there's we're having a little. I've been having an ongoing debate really with myself over is it better to grovel and kiss the ring, or is it better to stand up to the bully? And there's evidence on both sides of that question. The Chinese kind of stood up to him in his first term and basically got away with it. Other countries have groveled and not much happened after that. So, both tactics can work. The difficulty is figuring out which one is the right one for that given circumstance. And that's what countries have to do. But I've talked to other governments and they're all getting ready. So we'll see.
Bill Reinsch, thank you very much for joining us today.